Hello, my name is Andy Malashevsky, and I will be covering a banned book this week for the Mass Communications 101 class. And the banned book that I chose is called 13 Reasons Why. There's a picture of the book here. The book actually interested me because it is what the Netflix series was based on, and so I've seen the first two seasons of the Netflix series, so I thought it would be interesting. Um, as an English major, my gut reaction to the concept of banning books is it's bad. Book censorship is bad. We shouldn't do that. But because I have seen the Netflix series and now that I've read the book, I actually do see why it's a more complex. There's more complexity to banning this book than maybe some other books. And I'll talk about why. So, just to give you some context, this book is split narration. It's narrated by a teen boy named Clay Jensen who is recounting listening to tapes that were recorded by a girl from his school who committed suicide. And her name is Hannah Baker. And um, the book is called 13 Reasons Why because in these tapes, Hannah Baker speaks directly to 13 people that she feels contributed to her suicide and could have done more basically to prevent her suicide. The book actually covers a lot of, uh, you know, I guess controversial material as far as like teen, subjects go. There's mentions of sex, of teenage drinking, some drug use, I believe, and teen suicide. So you can see why some schools, had a sort of knee-jerk reaction against the book to ban it. So let me just go into the specific reasons why it was banned in some school districts. So a Mesa County school district pulled the book from circulation. It was returned eventually, but they basically originally thought it was too graphic. And then an elementary school in Florida banned the book from campus, even for personal reading, arguing students weren't mature enough to handle the depiction of suicide, profanity, sexual content, and drug use. It was also pulled from middle school classrooms in Anderson County, Kentucky. Several school districts cautioned parents against letting their children view the Netflix series that is related to the book. So I do consider the book and the series to be two different entities. For one, the book is a little more simplistic. The Netflix series kind of expands on and actually depicts some of the events, in the book. So we get, more graphic sex, I think, and profanity and things like that. But all that to say, I don't think that books should be banned from school just for sexual content, especially when it is covering such an important topic as in this novel where the girl is like sexually assaulted. So, um, one thing, the one thing though that does kind of, for me, make banning the book a little bit more or less reactionary, I would say, is the topic of suicide being covered in a certain way. And when I say in a certain way, let me read a little passage here for you. So this is Hannah speaking, and then I will just cut out the parts that Clay is interjecting with his thoughts. So Hannah says, but sometimes I took things further and wondered how I would do it. I would tuck myself into bed and wonder if there was anything in the house I could use. A gun? No, we never owned one, and I wouldn't know where to get one. What about hanging? Well, what would I use? Where would I do it? Even if I knew what and where, I could never get beyond the visual of someone finding me swinging inches from the floor. I couldn't do that to Mom and Dad. It became a sick sort of game imagining the ways to kill myself, and there's some pretty weird and creative ways. It came down to two lines of thinking. If I wanted people to think it was an accident, I'd drive my car off the road, someplace where there's no chance of survival. And there are so many places to do that on the outskirts of town. I've probably driven by each of them a dozen times in the past couple weeks. So, and then Clay, his thoughts are reflecting on the fact that Hannah actually chose to commit suicide using pills. So, one of the things that kind of makes me, again, that this issue is a little more complex is because there is a phenomenon of copycat suicides. There was actually a study done after the release of the Netflix show by the Journal of American Medical, let's see, yeah, Journal of American Medical Association, that talked about how after the show was released, there was actually a 26% increase in searches for how to commit suicide, an 18% increase for commit suicide, and 9% increase for how to kill yourself. So there's a lot of studies on the phenomenon of copycat suicides and suicide in the media, and how it should be covered. One of the things that a lot of medical professionals say is that you should never graphically depict suicide, or you should never really ideate suicide in the way that it is in this book, specifically. And that is because it, prompts people to think about how they might want to commit suicide themselves. So that kind of leads to a copycat phenomenon where people are more at risk of committing suicide because they see it done. And the other thing, in this book that kind of sort of gives me pause is the fact that I think suicide is an incredibly important topic. I don't think that schools should go about banning books just because they contain references to suicide or address teen suicide, because obviously that is a really important topic that students need to, have access to information about. But it is the way in which we orient the discussions around suicide, especially for like young, impressionable people, that is important. So talking about suicidal tendencies and mental health is extremely important, but only if the school really has the resources to handle that in a sensitive and medically approved way. So I'll read a little bit of the foreword too from the author Jay Asher, because I think it kind of speaks to that issue with schools having the book on their shelves. So he says, the publication of 13 Reasons Why coincided with schools reevaluating their role in student safety, both physically and emotionally. Slowly recognizing the reach and influence of social media, which was only starting to emerge, adults began to see that the teen years were increasingly complex. And then I'll skip ahead a little. He says, this book has given me the opportunity to speak in schools across the country and in several countries around the world. When my presentations are more issue-oriented, I like to begin with an admission. I am in no way an expert. So right there you have sort of an admission that medical professionals should be leading these discussions, which, there are school counselors, psychologists, that are more professionally equipped to handle student, questions about suicide. And then there's also the larger question of like, how much responsibility do we attribute to the school themselves in public safety and student mental health? We know that there are tons of schools out there that just don't have the resources to deal with students' mental health adequately, whether it's because the school district doesn't want to assume the responsibility, whether it's because the school district does not have the actual like physical resources to do that. Education funding being cut, programs being challenged by parents and community leaders. Introducing the idea of school responsibility in the discussion about suicide is really tricky. And I don't envy school administrators that have to kind of deal with that, because on the one hand, you know that educators want their students to be happy and to be taken care of. But on the other hand, you have, are you equipped to deal with it? And can you do it in such a way that doesn't, assume extra liability on the school's part when students inevitably, may take their own life either way? And part of the handling, part of the controversy of the book too is that the narrator points out that the school failed the student, and so kind of like, in a mirror situation, you see like schools, one, just wanting to, in a sort of like, again, a knee-jerk reaction against the graphic or more like less acceptable elements of the book as far as like sex and teen drinking, not wanting to associate with that, but more importantly, like not understanding how to handle the conversation with students. So for this reason, I do think that this book should be available on school shelves to students, but I believe that it should come with the right mental health resources. And I think that schools should be ready and able to answer questions students have about the topic if they carry the book and if they allow students to read it, on school time. So I don't know if anyone agrees with me there, but happy to take comments, open to suggestions, and I hope you learned a little about my about a banned book here. So thanks.